Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Kathy Farah. And guess what? It's International Women's Day. And I have chosen this day to have a special Facebook Live with you. So you might have noticed that I haven't done this for a while. Life kind of got in the way. And I just decided today would be a great day to introduce you to some wonderful people that you may already know. And of course, as luck would have it, I was having tech issues up until right now. So if once in a while I'll see my video go yellow, so be it. So again, International Day of Women, and we're going to be talking about the wisdom of women. So let's get right to it. So I want to introduce to you the co-founders of Influential She. First, I'm going to bring Deb Soholt on. There we go,
Hi,
Deb.
Dr. Kathy.
Hey there. So Deb is I first met Deb through a mutual acquaintance who shall be named, Annie Davis. And by the way, if you folks are not able to see, welcome to anyone who's watching this now and anyone who's watching it after the fact. So Deb is a nurse, she's an RN, and she is a former state senator of South Dakota. And I think you said you termed out?
Yes.
Okay, so 4 terms as a state senator. And she has been really an advocate for women. She has a long history of being the women's health director at Vera in South Dakota. She pioneered, I'll say it again, pioneered a functional medicine clinic for women, including women's hormones. And that wasn't enough for her. Besides being a mom and now a grandma, she became active in politics. And like I said, she became a state senator, and she continued to champion the rights of women and children. So welcome, Deb. It's great.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And in addition to Deb, well, I met Dr. Melody Schopp through Deb. And so let's bring her on as well. The button for getting kicked from the studio is right next to the one for ad.
Great. My luck, there I go, right?
Right. So, hi there, Dr. Melody. Welcome to the show. And so Dr. Melody also is a very renowned, actually both these folks have long bios. They have a couple pages here, and I've just picked out a couple of highlights. And on their website, influentialshe.com, you can really get some of the details. So Deb is an educator, Melody is an educator, Dr. Melody, I should say. I'm sorry. That's one of the things that happens to women, by the way. I read a study not long ago that traditionally, especially in conferences with physicians, that women physicians don't get referred to as doctor nearly as often as men, by the way. So at any rate, she also took the top position as a Secretary of Education in South Dakota. She's been on a lot of amazing offices, including the president of the National Council of Chief State School Officers. Welcome to the program, Dr. Melody.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Kathy.
So both of these, and you can call me Kathy, by the way.
You can call me Melody.
All right, sounds good. And I love on your website, Influential She, it says, I'm going to read this because it's a quote. They break down barriers, unleashing women to tap into their passions and accelerate their trajectory for influence. Because when women have influence, a better humanity emerges. So tell me, ladies, why did you start this business?
Well, I'm going to kick it off, and then Mel's going to talk a little bit about our high leverage practices. But we got to know each other through the legislature, and we honestly could not believe that we didn't know each other. South Dakota is a small state. We were both in leadership positions within our respective professions. But I ended up chairing the Senate Education Committee, and Melody was the Secretary of Education. And okay, the first thing I noticed about her is like she always wore really great shoes. And so she would come into the committee just like dressed so classy with fantastic shoes, and then could back it, that sass, if you will, back it up with being so brilliantly prepared with a vision around this huge picture of advancing education in the state of South Dakota and nationally. So we got to know each other. And over time, we started to say, well, what are we going to do next? That we've had these careers that have really served us well. We've achieved positions that, we never even imagined we would get to, and we wanted to give back to women. And we could see in talking through many glasses of red wine, I might add, in a lot of conversation, talking about the gap for women, that when we started to really look at the literature, there's this very high end, the lean in effort of, that's very high end CEO, of which many women don't feel attainable. And there's a lot of literature and information about how do you be a mom and, still be a wife and raise your kids and have a career and go to the spa. But in between, there was not a lot of literature or even advice to women regarding how do you really accelerate who you are and how do you bring your passions to the world as the wisdom of women. So we saw that for each of us, we had probably spent on our own in an aggregate, each of us about 15 years, what we call wandering around in the wilderness, like being pulled by other forces telling us who we should be or how we should be, or an organization trying to define ourselves. And we felt that we would like to cut through the clutter. And we started to talk about, is this a leadership track? Is it we don't even know for sure what this is. One day we said, you know what? It's about influence. It's about the influence of women and the wisdom of women wherever they are, whether you're a stay-at-home mom, community volunteer, you're climbing a corporate ladder, you're pursuing a profession. How do we unleash that unbelievable power and help women feel this confidence within themselves? And how do you accelerate that? So you don't have to wait decades to try to understand that. In other words, what would we tell our younger selves if we could? And that was where Influential She was born.
Beautiful. I love that. That was going to be one of my questions. What would you tell your younger she?
From that, then we developed these, what we call the talismanic 10. So I'm going to let Mel take it from there.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. And, Deb was talking about this admiration. It was truly a mutual admiration society between the two of us. What's interesting is that Deb brought this other side of, I think, everything, she came to committee as the chair of the Senate Education Committee, coming from the medical field, and brought, again, this other vision that I think was something for me that it was really admirable, that we found that we had this synergy between us that helped us in delivering and putting together what we call these 10 high leverage practices. Now, why do we call them that? When you think about what a lever is, it provides that maximum amount of output with the least amount of effort. So when we think about what we want to do in a woman's life, we want really women to be focused on using all of their efforts, and their outcomes should be aligned with who they are, but being spent sort of what we always call in the flow, having a good time with it, less time, not working so hard, but really have that maximum amount of effort. So we developed these 10. I think we started out, Deb, it was something like 21 of them we put together, and boiled it down to 10. And it's not like they're not sequential. It's not like if you have to check one off before you go to the next one. Some don't even really apply to women's lives. And we'll talk a little bit about our podcast and how we find that women really probably have focused on one thing that's helped them become that. But we have these, what we call the talismanic 10, the mysteries of you. I'm just going to go through them briefly, and we'll highlight a couple tonight, I think is what we're going to go through. But thinking about self it's really being who that person is, being completely who you are, living out your passion and your values. And then the one that I don't spend enough time on, and I'm be curious about if women do, is the what is, where you really take that honest assessment and understand who you are within your current reality. Connection. And boy, I'll talk, when you think about over the last few years, how we found how much we miss connection in a different sort of way. But it's not just passing out the business cards. It's having that really respectful and that meaningful relationship, not only with other people, but connecting with yourself. Another one is voice, the high leverage practice of voice. And it's developing that power by using your voice. I love the tagline that we have for that. It's use your voice and don't raise your voice, raise your words. So when we think about that, be the voice, don't be the echo. You've maybe heard that in other sorts of situations as well. Another high leverage practice is doing. And this is one where I think women in particular sometimes get really stuck, where they don't think they can go any further. It's moving off from that stuckness, where we just look around us and we go, you know what, this is just where I'm going to be. There's nothing I can do about it. And we have that committee in our head that we chair all the time and just goes around and around and around. But there's that opportunity to really move beyond that. As if, the high leverage practice of as if is like, you're going to forge ahead until you're apprehended. I think both Deb and I think we both probably practiced this in our life, that sometimes we did it and sometimes maybe not in the way we should have, but proceeding ahead, because then when you proceed ahead, you're going to kick that doing into place as well. The HLP of possibility, it's shaking up all that conventional wisdom and thinking, what if I did this? And then doing it and unleashing imagination, innovation, and being able to move forward. Kathy, I think the next.
Can you say that one again?
That was possibility.
Possibility. Okay.
Yeah. But here's yours, Kathy. So when we talked to Kathy and we focused in on Kathy, it's like,
yeah, they said this word that I'd never heard of.
Yeah. So, but it just explains you, Kathy. I mean, I think this is who you are. It's perspicaciousness. And perspicaciousness, number one, we had to look it up how to pronounce it. And then we had to figure out how to spell it. So if you can do that, you're going to win the spelling bee. I can guarantee it. But it's that power. It's the power that you had, Kathy, to take all those disparate pieces when you're thinking about medicine or thinking about anything in life, and you connect dots that maybe other people didn't put together. You know, it's like we're not one-dimensional. People aren't one-dimensional, but it's being able to take all those pieces out of life and kind of make sense of them for other people. And then the one I think you are both interested in that you're really masters at is bio. You and Deb, I know that this has been your passion throughout your entire career, is really knowing that innate biological self, because we don't operate, one-dimensionally. It is really how we operate. If we're not, in sync with ourselves biologically, we're not in sync with ourselves as a whole person. So didn't mean to take up all that time, but those are sort of encompassing about what we really believe
and story.
Going forward. And story. And that's the one that I just was going to wrap a bow around. Every woman we've talked to, and we've podcasted, I think it's been with over about close to 70 women. Every woman and every person who's out there tonight, you've all got a story. And so story puts that thing behind, no matter what HLP we land on, story is what we all bring to the table. And it's really important that we know that story.
The wisdom of story, for sure. So I don't even know if I can repeat them all, but I love the sentiment for sure. So how about for each of you? Do you have like a favorite one, or do you like try to aspire to each of these? I'm just curious. Deb, you want to chime in?
I think one of the interesting things about the talismanic 10 is that it came through mistake. And that was part of the wisdom that we wanted to portray to others. So I'm going to give an example of what is. And so what is like the baggage you bring, and we all have it. And some of them are just like beautiful pieces of luggage that we should retain for the rest of our lives. And there's a lot of baggage that we need to leave at a train station somewhere. And they're battered and ugly. And it is a part of the fabric of who we are and how do we grow from it. And then there's the what is that's around you, like your supportive relationships, the friends that you have, the friends you should maybe think about starting to move away from because they're not so positive for you. In the work sphere, I think what is an example of not getting it right and not sitting down and like really assessing was in starting this work that I just absolutely loved and ended up having success in with functional medicine and the work that you've been doing, Dr. Kathy, was not really assessing the readiness of the organization to have not label this concept like voodoo, and taking a passion and an idea and really being a decade ahead in thought. And at least I thought maybe it was a decade, but it was really like 2 decades ahead.
Yes.
And it was so far ahead that people couldn't even understand what was being talked about. And we're so entrenched in what the old primary care model was of, not really understanding the interconnectedness of the self, but as just separate organs and not how they all dynamically come together. And really in this hormonal rhythm of women as different from men. So way ahead, if I had assessed my environment better, if I had really sat down and strategically thought about that, I would have saved a lot of pain and headache. It doesn't mean I wouldn't have forged ahead. I would have just forged ahead in a completely different way. And I think there were so many barriers in my way that I just had to keep climbing up and over and up and over like it was exhausting instead of sitting back. And so when I really got clear on that, when I went into the political world, I was able to really take some time to assess where are the power players here? What game am I playing? What am I in? Who are the brokers? How do I start to accelerate my influence within the brokers that have way more experience than me? And I even watch now colleagues that are in that space coming in all just hell-bent, like this is my idea and I'm going to do it, and stepping over everyone and reducing influence along the way as you go. We don't want that for women. We want them to spend some time really looking at that, not only in work, but in their own relationship, in their children's relationship, and how far can you actually go? So the advice from us is the wisdom from us really comes from over and over. We could talk about stories of not having done it well.
And yet you forged ahead. What helped you? What helped you do that climb up? And I heard you say that, and I understand, I've been there, that you might have assessed the readiness to change or whatever that happens to be, but you might have done it anyway. So what
I think I would have done it anyway, but I probably would have the doing around the possibility of moving into that arena. I would have, of course, corrected the things that were the stepping stones to get there. And the kind of connections, like Mel talked about, connections with other people that should have been forged in anticipation of. And so I think just the trajectory would have been altered. Now, I'm not saying it wouldn't have been a tough road anyway, but I don't think I would have had to been beat up on all fronts, that maybe I could have cut those in half and been more influential in the relationships I developed early on to then start to cement that idea.
Yeah, so I heard develop relationships, and you wouldn't have gotten beat up so much. I think both of those things are real, because you still accomplished what you wanted to accomplish to a certain extent, I think. But maybe the part you could have done without is getting beat up. And
Right.
What do you do? So speaking of stories, so I mean, this is your story of being ahead of your time and starting a functional medicine clinic for women in South Dakota. And Mel, I liked in your bio hearing about also in South Dakota, kind of your foray into bringing the internet to the school. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's interesting when you look back and you think about all those decisions along the way that were like, whether they were serendipitous or, you really do make the decision. So, I taught for a long, long time in a tiny little town in South Dakota in the middle of nowhere. And technology was really my way out, if I want to say, whether it needed to be out or whatever. Technology came to little rural South Dakota. CNN came and did a story on technology in rural America and gave me the opportunity then to come to the Department of Education, but not without having to make some sort of decision point along the way that allow me to then to think about what is the possibility that I could do something different. So here I was in this 24 years in the classroom, didn't even think about what the next thing could be, but taking that, thinking about what are the possibilities, where could it take me, making that pivotal decision to make a career change, even though it wasn't easy to do, to move away from my family, to commute, to do all those different things, became a pivotal point within my life about then being able to use some of these other things as well. Think about, what is the possibility, but what is the potential of what's going to happen to me in my rural community? What are people going to think? What are people going to think about that woman who's leaving her family when she still has kids in high school and going out and forging a career on her own? But without those decisions, without taking those chances and looking at those possibilities, I probably could still be there. Is that all bad? But for me, it opened up doors as well by have that, and that's part of my story. It's part of the story that has a couple other pieces in there, but was an important part of my story as well.
But the part she won't tell you about wiring her classroom.
That's totally what I want to hear.
Is that she just climbed up into the ceiling herself and ran wires to bring this internet to her students, and was one of the first in the nation to get her classroom wired. And she just did it by grit and figuring it out herself. So this wasn't some grand design. This is being very perspicacious, honestly, in seeing that this technology was going to be a gateway for these kids to be in a whole different world. And she saw that way before anyone else did, and connected the dots that I have to do something about this.
Right. That's a part of the story that I wanted to hear. CNN just randomly.
They didn't just show up.
They showed up because you were ahead of you were doing this, 2009, 2008? You were wiring your classroom in South Dakota, and there's a lot of places in South Dakota that still are not wired. So it's that, acting as what if, or as if it was all going to be fine, and as if. Yeah. And I also heard in both your stories what are people going to say?
Yeah.
leaving
That was,
your family
yeah.
and such. Say a little bit
Yeah,
more.
I think, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about that because I think it's been something both Deb and I have talked about where there are those, I don't care how far we've advanced as women, how we've, it was the old, you can do it all or whatever. Do you remember the old commercials where women can do it all? It's like they stand there with their aprons on, and yet they're these powerful women in places. I don't care how far we've evolved. There is still all these things surround us that keep us sometimes that people put us in buckets, and they still think that women still have the primary responsibilities in the home, and we can't separate that. That's part of who we are. But I think both Deb and I felt or dealt with things in that period of time where we had people who thought, what are these women doing? I, in particular, again, I was in a really small rural community where, women had these very traditional roles. Even my husband, he'd grown up in a very traditional type of family. And here was this person who I went off and I was gone for 5 days out of the week. And I came home on weekends sometimes and was not always there to pack the lunches and, be at every ball game, and was very untraditional. And to try to separate about taking and forging a path that I knew was something that was important, not just for me, but I really believed in what I was doing for the kids of South Dakota. But then how do you balance that out and still stay whole as a woman without letting those extraneous forces kind of drag you down? And I think probably women do experience that. Kathy, you've probably done that, and being sort of this forward-thinking leader in your field that, people go, what in the world is she doing? It'd be a lot easier if you just stayed in that traditional sort of path. So I think as females, we sometimes deal with that more than probably men do in many different ways, good or bad. I don't know. It makes us stronger, perhaps. I think that's up for
I think
discussion.
so. Certainly, I think about some of those long nights in the ER and, actually having a patient saying, what are you doing here? Why aren't you home? And I'm thinking, well, if I wasn't here, you wouldn't be
Yeah.
seeing doctor right now. By the way. So yeah, sometimes some of those things I do think are different still to a certain extent
Yeah,
for men and for women. And again, is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. And I'm not, and I don't want to be just in, saying that all men are this or all women are this or all whatever.
No.
I don't really believe in that. However, I think, the word balance certainly comes to play. And how do we use our wisdom, and how do we actually really take care of ourselves? So Deb, you must have had to counsel women for a long time, and maybe still are in your business.
Yeah. Well, and I just think the thing about it is that, circling back to Melody saying, this concept of what will people think? Well, we've been hearing this vulnerability from, it doesn't matter how top of the game women are within their careers or how much they're starting out. 100% this vulnerability comes through in our podcast. And we're just kind of astounded by it. We think, okay, there's some point where you just arrive and then all of a sudden you're not concerned about what other people think or what you think about yourself, and it's just not true. And I don't know where that all comes from, but what I do know is that in our wisdom from all of us, I know it's easy to say you can't worry so much about what people think, but you really can't worry about what people think, except for those core relationships that you're trying to attend to that really matter and are deeply seated in your heart. Because it's really about being authentically yourself. And at the end of the day, that's where this high leverage practice of self, if you can understand your deep-seated values, which hang with you your whole life, and just accept those and then operate out of those values, then you will be strong enough not to care so much about what other people think. But at the end of the day, you want to be respected, you want to be heard, you will not always be liked. But if you can authentically keep circling back to yourself, and we can think about in our careers where, an organization tells you, here's this mantra of how you're supposed to be in customer service, or what kind of a leader or a manager you're supposed to be, or whatever that garbage is, which really should just be a framework of ideas for which then your authentic self can act between. So if we were to give some advice on this we'd be saying, we spent way less time having others sing us around in the wind, like this is what a leader does in this environment. This is what a woman does in medicine. This is what a woman does. This is what a mother does when she has a family. She doesn't commute to the state capitol and become the Secretary of Education and leave her family. This is what, and just say that is somebody else's written story that has absolutely no sense to me. And I have to circle back to my authentic self and start acting from that place, because that is where you will always come back to. And if you can do that, and your confidence will build, and you'll less and less care about what other people think.
Beautiful. Yeah, I call it, with my wiser medicine, I call it my wiser self, authentic self, wiser self. So what helps you do that? What helps you tap into your authentic self or your wiser self? Either one of you.
I'm going to jump into this, and then Deb, please, as well. I think we all have, those connections that we know can build us up and keep us whole and keep us strong. I think that's been really important and really, really critical throughout all of our careers. If we look back, and it's interesting how sometimes connections can, ebb and flow throughout a period of time. Sometimes we come back to old connections we have better, but I think connections are critically important. And I think probably females more than ever, or women more than ever, really rely on that. And we need to really think about that when we're needing that support and so forth. And that, I know you can be really strong inwardly. And I always thought that I'm a rock and I'm solid. But boy, when I have one of those, I really need to know when to reach out to people, who the people are who are going to shore me up. And I think that that's been, whether it's family members, but it's also really strong friends. And that can be male and female. It's not just women as well. Deb, I don't know what you think about.
Well, I think, there's many different ways that you start to see it and understand it for yourself. But one of them is how your body starts talking to you. And many times your body will give you a big message, 2 or 3 of them, before your brain will even register that I'm moving away from who I really am. And, of sleepless nights and feeling anxiety and your gut's off. And all of a sudden you're going, okay, I'm disconnected from who I really am. And I need to, and some of it's, you actually have a bug going on, or you need some things, but there are messages of your body if you will listen to it. The other thing is once I really got in touch with my authentic self, like if I'm not really having some times of just laughing in like a sassy way, and my sass is low, I know that I have moved away from my authentic self, or my relationships, that I'm not hanging out with the people that help to bring that out with me together in synergy with other people. My authentic self needs to be in community with others. It doesn't necessarily have to be like big community, but in synergistic community, where we're exchanging energy in who we are in our presence, and then our ideas together. And I feel myself drifting away from myself if I don't put myself in those spaces. But then that leads to choices that I have to make about where am I going to be and what am I going to do. And it's about how are you expressing your values, and are you spending more time doing the things that are aligned with you, or are you spending more time doing things that are aligned with other people? And these are choices we have to make all the time. And there's absolutely zero perfection in this. I mean, Mel and I'd be the last people to say we got this right. And but we learn to be more aware and to spend less time in that space of not being who we are. And the more consistent you get, the more joy starts to emerge. And then that's where, the flow and the fun really starts to happen, even when it's tough. If you're cooking on cylinders of you.
Deb and Kathy, I'm going to just jump in here really quick, because it's interesting that the two of us have talked that as we come to this stage of your life, or wherever you're making these next choices, people should think, oh, this is just great. Thing is, now you have all this past stuff behind you, and you can just pull from it and whatever. And I think that no matter what stage you are in life, I think a recognition and acceptance that you're going to go through different times in which you really feel, again, vulnerable. I think, Deb, you and I have talked about where we felt more vulnerable in the last few years than we did, because before we had these really defined pieces that defined who we were. I got to give you just a quick story. I remember right after I was done being Secretary of Education, it was one of the first, I was doing some consulting, and I was going to facilitate a panel and with a group of people I'd never met, and we were going to be in California. So these are, thought this is great. We get on a call, we're doing all this pre-planning, and we hadn't met each other. So we went around, we introduced ourselves, they introduced, and I was the last one. And all of a sudden I said, I'm Melody Schopp. And all of a sudden I didn't have a title anymore. So for so long in my life, I'm Melody Schopp, Secretary of Education. I I didn't even know who I was. And so I had to go back and redefine myself after that period of time and think, okay, who am I now? And it was a really, it's so, so pivotal in that piece of like going on to that next phase of my life, that I think that's just ongoing. And I don't think women should ever think there's not that point when you arrive and you feel like, wow, here I am. We're vulnerable, and it's okay to be vulnerable. And it's okay to admit it and accept it, and then figure out that next step.
And it really is a good question. Any stage, who am I now? I mean,
Who
I think
am I now?
a certain age, once I got my Medicare card, it's like, whoa, people are retaring.
I
And
know.
I think we've all
Yeah.
said, that I'm not, whatever retiring is, I don't know. Re-envisioning, whatever. But, who am I now? Whether 25 or 50 or 65 or whatever it is, who am I now? That's a really good question. I also was struck when you were talking about connection, and you mentioned, Dr. Melody, that it says, I don't know if guys do this as much as women. Actually, they don't. And part of it is science. Part of it is the biology. And the biology of women, for the most part, we have oxytocin, and oxytocin is that bonding hormone. So again, it's not 100% women do this and men do that or whatever. However, we are more wired. Those chemicals in our body are more wired for connection, and getting energy off of other people. That doesn't mean we're not introverts or extroverts or whatever. In fact, I don't know about you folks, but it surprised me. I mean, coming into the pandemic, I was traveling about a week a month, and then all of a sudden that stopped. And I also never thought that I would be doing mind body groups online. I just didn't have an interest. And it was so interesting to be able to be in spaces like this or on Zoom, which I spend a lot of time on now, and really being able to connect if I got out of my head and really basically into my body, into my heart, like you mentioned, Deb. You didn't mention heart, but you meant body for sure. And I do find that for me, that part of that wisdom is really dropping from this head and who's saying what and who's doing what into the heart, which can happen on screen. It can happen when you're not even with someone. So all those things kind of came to my mind as you all were talking. Yeah. So about that. So, I mean, COVID, who would have guessed 3 years ago what our world would come to? And I think it's been a real time of challenge with that disconnection piece. Particularly for folks who really couldn't travel or we shouldn't travel. And even now, sometimes there's that a bit of, should we, shouldn't. And there's so much dichotomy in our country, actually. And so I really feel, I hear, laughing and having fun and joy. And I know that has to be part of my day. But how do you reconcile that when there's so much anguish going on in the world? What helps you wise women with that?
Yeah. You really brought something to mind, because I think, again, here we are again in a different sort of place within the entire world right now, when we're thinking about Ukraine and thinking about what's going on worldwide, that I think is bringing this other level of anxiety. And, how do we think about that? How do we deal with that? How do we make sure that we are being thoughtful about how we talk about that? One of the things that we haven't talked about yet is voice, and I kind of deviate a little bit, but yet I think it's an important piece with that.
Please.
I think one of the high leverage practice of voice is so critically important right now, particularly within the society, I think, and how we talk and how we think. The tendency is to really make sure that we're the ones who get heard, and that's not just using the verbal voice. It's whether we're using voice within social media, the types of voices that we use, and how we express ourselves in many different venues. And the tendency right now in society is that we just got to be really loud. We got to be the first one that's heard. We got to make sure our opinion is heard for the purpose of making sure the opinion is the one that we believe is right. And instead, what our high leverage practice of voice talks about, is just as important to be able to listen intently as it is to have your voice heard. And I think I learned this, Deb, you were a master of it in the legislature, because the tendency, I think, amongst policymakers is sometimes they want to be the one who gets heard first. They want to be really loud. And I think for all of us, when we're in a conversation, you're always thinking about what am I going to say next instead of what am I hearing that I'm going to respond to. And that was something I really learned and had to work on. I think that was really valuable for me, listening to be able to respond. So it's not just using my voice about, I don't have all these bullet points written down. I got to get to everyone, but how am I going to listen to that person so then my voice can be heard? And when we use that respectful sort of back and forth, it really brings out a different sort of dialogue among people. And so I think that whole high leverage practice of voice, critically important, and probably more so today than it's ever been a lot of times in past ages and so forth. And Deb, I know you talk about that a lot as well.
Well, and how you talk about using voice and how we connect with others, going back, Dr. Kathy, to what you're talking about, us connecting, is really making a commitment. If you want to accelerate your influence, you can choose to have connections where it's, I see you. Like I see you. And a lot of times people think that takes knowing everything about a person and really having this deep relationship. This can happen like in a second of, I am intently with you and I see you in my connection. And I'm interested enough to give you that respect of seeing you. And that then folds into this listening to where they're at. And it doesn't have to take that long. And that is where we build these authentic connections that start to move things forward. And so many times we think, okay, I met all these people and I have all these cards. And like Melody talked about, circulating a room, getting a lot of business cards. This is about, I connect my energy. And this is where I thought it was hard when we started to move to like a lot of virtual, because we aren't sensing the true energy field between us in an ICU moment. But we can do that online but also we can be online and be distracted and like looking and like I'm looking like I'm not with it. I'm not staying present for whatever this engagement is. People know that, they see that, they feel that. And so we see this distraction on the virtual side. But if you want to, cut through the crowd and to become more influential with whatever it is your passion is and however you want to leverage your authentic self, really accelerating your ICU moments with people and like really practicing it and really getting respectfully intentional. It moves things like you just can't. Even people, it's so easy to connect with people you love and they're like you and you're philosophically aligned and like you can jazz in the moment together. It's much more difficult to say, I'm going to respectfully see you, someone that I incredibly disagree with, just because I'm going to connect with you on the level of a humanity moment.
Deb, you have a great line. You got to share the line that you would share with people who you didn't always agree with. I love it. What you would always say to them.
Oh, when I'd say, you've given me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And so honestly, it took me a decade to come up with this line, because I was like trying to think about, and this was pre-politics. I was in the politics of the healthcare arena and would be with people with, positional power over, just a variety of things. And they're angry about something and they're just like completely off the rails. And I'm like, what am I going to say? What am I going to respectfully say? Because I don't like agree with you. I don't want to acquiesce to you. I don't want to end up being like a wallflower with you, but I want to be respectful with you. Like, what is it that I could say that would make this moment be okay? And I finally came to it, and it works 100%. To look someone respectfully in the eye with no condescension, with no snarky, nothing, but deeply from your heart say, you've given me a lot to think about. And I will tell you, to 100% of the time that works. In fact, I should probably patent that little sentence, because it's like not out there, that you've given me a lot to think about. Because 100% people walk away satisfied. Now, you don't have to think about it again if you don't want to. I didn't commit to anything. I don't have to follow up with anything. I didn't agree with you, but you've given me a lot to think about. And I might think about, I don't agree with one thing you just said. That might be what I think when I walk away. But the fact that you say you've given me a lot to think about is respectfully satisfying to the other person, to know that they have been heard, that I was present with you enough to hear what you said.
Yeah.
And now some people might take away, well, she agreed with me, but no, I didn't. You've just given me a lot to think about.
And like you said, it could be 1 second. It could be
1 second.
But you also said this. You said, you've given me a lot to think about, but I'm not saying it in a snarky way.
Right.
I think that respectful, and Deb, you also use the word a respectful back and forth. That I think
Respectful back and forth.
respectful dialogue, respectful back and forth doesn't mean we have to agree, but that respect piece is something that I hope our children and grandchildren are able to get that from somewhere in the society right now. But you've given me a
Well,
lot.
and the thing is that respectful dialogue requires two people. It's reciprocal, or however many people are in the room. We've all chosen to rise up to a space of respect. That's not always going to happen. So some of that respectful dialogue is not reacting to go off the rails yourself when someone else is, and just saying, I choose to accelerate my influence in this situation. And I'm going to, either just be present with you while you unload all this thing. I'm going to give you a nod, maybe ask you a respectful thing. Like I can tell, I can tell this is really upsetting you. This is really, and then to say, you know what? You've given me a lot to think about. And then you just exit. And it is a way to extract yourself and be respectful. And yet it does really 100% of the time fosters a stronger connection.
Yeah, beautiful. And you talk about a bit about energy, and I do think that this is energetic in a way. And I also feel like it's, getting out of our head. And if we can, at least one of my practices is if I find myself, reacting to what someone is saying, is to just if I have the foresight and even the microsecond to stop myself or to whatever, feel my feet on the ground. And this is in person and not in person. Breathe into my belly. So literally, here's the science again. I can't help myself. Yep. Science. So literally what happens if I do a belly breath or belly breathing, I kick into the relaxation response. So that prefrontal cortex and think rather than just have that be the react fight mode that happens when I don't go into the relaxation response. So all of those things are, and it's really hard to connect when I'm like this, fighting or running away. So just
I always think of this funny little story. There was this, it was a drug dog and with his handler, and went into a situation where they were at a snowmobile place, this lodge. And, I think there was a lot of chemicals that were floating around. And so the dog started to react. And the handler said, "Stand down. We're not working today." And when this is a long time ago, I heard that story, but to your point of this grounding your feet, taking a belly breath, I actually have this thought when my fight wants to kick in super fast. And I say to myself, "Stand down. You're not working today." And it just helped me have this kind of funny story that helps to drive the pause for myself when I just, especially when you're under high stress and you're tired and, somebody stomped on your very last nerve. And does it mean we always get this right? No, but there's always so much more work to go back and repair the relationship and try to get on level footing again than to take a belly breath, to put your feet on the ground, give yourself some time to think, to say to someone, "You've given me a lot to think about," get out of the situation so that you can come back and then manage it. It doesn't make you a wallflower. It doesn't make you someone who's not passionate or standing up for your position or a doormat to somebody's other situation. I think that's what people worry about, that I have to react right now. And that's not always true.
But I do think too that it is okay to know that there are times we need to admit and apologize. I think we both have seen that in our lives, that it's okay to say, "Hey, you know what, I was really wrong." And then to be able to move on from that space too. Because I think I can think about myself. When you're in positions of leadership, you think you've always got to have the right answers, that final decisions come to you, you're going to make a decision, but then there are times when you make the wrong decision. And that's be able to say, "You know what, that really wasn't very smart. Can we hit the reset button and do that again?" So I think it's both. It's if you don't get in those situations, and sometimes decisions are made that really are not the right one. And if so, it's really having the humility to be able to say that and be able to do that. And there's respect that comes from that as well.
Right.
Melody, and you're so right. There's also that situation where you need to just, own up. We're going to make mistakes. And, the sooner we own up to them and just apologize. And there's also where you have to stand your ground, where you're just like, we don't want to intimate. It's like one or the other. Sometimes you just, hey, that's just not going to work for me. Like where this is going, and you have to. So that connection of respect, when is it out of control? When do you need to apologize because we have to own it? When do you have to stand your ground? I just think that's all part of the growth. And I think women can accelerate how they do this. And, that's part of what we would tell them, is to think through for yourself how you're going to handle all these situations, and then be able to, tell your brain, this is how I'm going to handle it.
Yeah, we practice. I mean, if you were taking up a sport or playing the piano, we practice. We practice all these things. So perhaps practicing having those conversations, practicing the pause, practicing using your voice, whether it's using your voice to say, I'm sorry, or using your voice to say, nope, that's not going to work for me, or I don't agree with that. Is what I'm hearing. And even when you mentioned connection, when I first heard you talking about, I was really thinking about connection amongst people for the most part. But also, I think a reminder to myself is connection to ourselves. And you really started with that to begin with, too.
Yeah. And I think if anything that Deb has taught me throughout this entire time, that whole connection is to connection to ourselves, connection to what we believe in, connection to how, what those core inner things that drive us and that really don't change over time. But the whole bio-you piece of anything that I've become so much more aware of as a result of that, it's that connection to really how you're feeling. And they say, my heart aches when people are really sad. There really is a physical reaction that I had not thought about. I mean, I knew when I was anxious or I was sad or so forth, but it is a physical reaction I'm much more aware of, that we need to be part of that. And I think it's connecting to ourselves in those ways that we react both emotionally and physically, but then how we react within our whole being, that it's really been valuable for me to have those conversations and think about where things start, and how we use that inner energy to make ourselves a thriving person.
Yeah, and you're right. Really, using the body and and for some people, unfortunately, it's a wake-up call of getting cancer or high blood pressure or whatever it might be, because we spend so much of our time actually now literally in our head. Now we're in these squares in our head, and just being disconnected from the body. And, certainly it was interesting, as I went through different rotations as a medical student and resident, and I'd go to the ear, nose, and throat rotation, and they would do the ears and nose and throat, and the next one would do the heart, and the next one would. But what drew me to family medicine is that the fact that it's all of this. It's not just our head or our mind; it's our heart, it's our body, it's our gut, and everything that surrounds us. Right? The society we live in, the family we live in, what we eat, all of those things.
And you feel the sorrow or the stress or the anxiety, it's like at your cell level. And so our cells hold that energy. And I think we've just underestimated, what a full body experience all of this is. And Dr. Kathy, you've just really been a leader in all of that, especially being a primary care doctor. I mean, your wisdom of the mind, body, spirit, and the work that you have done to come to understand it at a science level, and then to really integrate it into your practice. You talk about being a pioneer. And so this is so beyond, let me look at your nose and your ears and your heart and then out of here. And so you have really found a pathway, even when the time is short, to really see people and to help them connect with their authentic body. And I mean, that's just really groundbreaking, and something that, we just have to have people keep fighting to move that forward.
She's a perspicacious pioneer.
She's a perspicacious
Don't forget
pioneer.
that. Don't forget
She is
that.
totally a perspicacious pioneer.
There you go. Connecting the dots, I guess. Well, it became clear the longer I was in my practice that, yes, I could write a prescription, but if people came back, maybe their blood pressure was dropped by 10 points or maybe 5 points or whatever, but they still were eating the same, or they still were in the same stressful marriage, or they're still in the same whatever, that I just couldn't feel good about that. And I knew that there was so much more, and there was so much more that I needed too. mean, a lot of it's about me too, that, that I needed to be able to get a good night's sleep. Because if you don't sleep, nothing else goes well, right?
Yep.
Nothing else goes well. And if you're not eating well, and of course, do I always have it right? Absolutely not. However, at least I feel like if I can listen to someone, that may be the best prescription. Really listen. And again, not necessarily listen from the head, listen from the heart. And I think that's, one thing that as we've gotten into electronic medical records and all of that, where, the idea has become now that we have our hands on the computer rather than hands on the patient, so to speak, has been a frustrating turn. As much as I like transfer of information, that part's been good. Yeah. So in all these I'm going to switch gears a little bit back to your podcast. So you've interviewed 70 women, I think you said?
I think close to that. Is that, Deb?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So has it led you to like awareness? What surprised you the most?
Oh, it's the vulnerability. I mean, we have women who, you look at their bios and it's like, these are just amazing women who have achieved whatever, and everybody has a level of vulnerability that you just wouldn't expect. So our youngest podcast guest was 10 years old. You'd think, oh, I think she was wiser than some of the rest of us. It's a 10-year-old and 18-year-old, and then we have women all the way up to age 80 and all the way in between. And I think they've enriched my life. I know, I'm sure you feel the same way, Deb, in so many different ways, and their stories are so powerful. But the biggest surprise was vulnerability. I don't know. What about you, Deb?
Well, I think the other thing is they're always like, really? Why me?
Yeah.
Why would I be interesting to talk to? And so it's that holding back. And so that's also some of the power and the wisdom of women, no matter what your age, that the story is different. And it isn't different because we're better. It's just different because we're different. And so it goes back to that biologic coursing of the different levels of hormones that we don't really talk about. We kind of want to suppress and pretend it doesn't exist, but turns out it's different. And so it's, I would say it's biology, Right. So really helping to have people see how powerful they are, everybody, and that vulnerability, everybody's feeling it. Everybody's trying to harness it and overcome it. And so that waiting for everything to be tidied up in a bow and somehow then there's this state of readiness, forget it. You're going to feel vulnerable and you're going to feel like it's an act of courage to walk into these arenas that you want to start moving into. So we want to help women go there faster for themselves. And as they would do it, not how somebody else would define that you should do it. There's certainly all kinds of learnings that you can get from other people, but at the end of the day, it's the truest form of expression of yourself. And go into that space that's kind of scares the crap out of you because everybody feels vulnerable.
And the other thing I think we've learned is that sometimes the story that people tell others is not the same story they're telling themselves or vice versa.
Yeah.
And that's what we brought out in a lot of women. That was a surprise for them, because we don't know their innate story. But I think that a big surprise is that, they haven't really thought about how their story has impacted not only other people, but themselves. And so really, sometimes those don't always match. I know it took me a long time to be able to share pieces of my story because you want to, portray this really strong, woman who just doesn't have any vulnerabilities. And once I started sharing that, the story I was telling others was not the same story I was telling myself. And that was a really important part that we're trying to help other women to do as well, so that they can really feel that by sharing that, you really become more of a whole person by sharing those details that maybe people didn't know about you, but they're part of who you are. That makes we're all squishy little objects we're kind of messy in our lives, and it's okay to let people know that. So.
I think, Mel, you're so right about that we will ask a question on a podcast and we would get, or in these pre-calls, and they would go, wow, okay, so I've never really thought about it. I really hadn't, something that's more some of their rootedness, like how did this come to you, or what happened here? And they'll go, oh, it's just a really good question. And through that reflection, starting to feel more strength and confidence in themselves about how they know more than they thought they knew about why they're here and what they're doing in this place that they're in. And, you know, to be encouragers to women and to say these areas, these 10 things, if you can get going and start to reflect on these, our talismanic 10, these high leverage practices and how they play out in your life and shore them up to give you confidence. At the end of the day, you have so much to contribute.
Yeah.
And we just need more and more women to step up and start doing it and being their full selves with confidence. And Melody and I really believe that it will be a powerful force in this world.
And just as you said, encouragers, I really hadn't thought about it because you can say encourage, right?
Yeah. Yeah, encourage.
Or encourage. Encouraging people. Well, we are coming up to about 5 minutes left officially. And so I think I've got this right. Let me make sure. So your website is, go ahead.
Yep, influentialshe.com.
Great. And you can go there and listen to podcasts. You can even listen to podcast. I've never listened to my podcast on there, but
oh, you should.
I'm sure I
good.
But you can catch them at, on Spotify, all the normal podcast sort of channels that you want to look for.
Great.
Doing that as well.
We talked a little bit about sleep. So I always want to give the viewers either anybody that's watching now, and this will be and hello to those that are watching, hello to those that will be watching after the fact, which will probably be most everyone. I do have a little gift for you. So if you want to listen to my sleep meditation, because we talked about this, sleep is so important. I mean, you can't find your story. You can't even get the story right. You can't. So if you want to, you can text sleep to 55444 and you will get my sleep meditation. And then you can ask to be put on my newsletter. And I've been pretty silent of late. And I think some of it was I felt like I had to get it right. But I've just been, I think it helped me doing your podcast and such, just like, the story doesn't have to be about perfection. I think that is one thing that social media does do to us. It sometimes thinks that, well, if I don't have something positive to share, I shouldn't, I want to look some certain way. And you can share this with your viewers as well, or your listeners. Text sleep to 55444 and you can get my sleep audio. It's not a video because you shouldn't be watching videos to go to sleep. I have to get that in there. All right. So then I think I also wanted to show you my website as well, which is kathyfarah.com, at kathyfarahmd.com. So folks, this has been wonderful. I have just really enjoyed spending time with you, celebrating this International Women's Day and celebrating the influential she and the wisdom of women. And I will be sending you backstage and then I'll join you there in just a moment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kathy.
Thank you so much.
It was great.
Thank you so much. So thank you all for joining, and thanks to those that are listening after the fact. And perhaps the question in this International Day of Women, whether you're a man or woman or something in between or whatever, is who am I? Who am I today? And who do I want to be tomorrow? So thank you for joining in, and it's been a pleasure, and look forward to connecting with you soon.